Good afternoon. So, thank you so much for the invitation. I was barely able to hear the intro all the way over there. I'm sure it was awesome, but I was originally on the Alpha List podcast, and one thing led to another, and now I'm here. So, in either case, my presentation today is going to be about security Kaizen for developers. First, it is very useful to know a little bit about me, just so you understand the perspective from which I'm coming from. The first thing is I am a former academic. I used to be the assistant professor of computer science at the Free University of Amsterdam, specialized in cybersecurity. I also worked in the industry for a while. I worked at Citrix on the Zen hypervisor team. I worked at ING Bank in the cybercrime team. And 10 years ago, I decided to start my own pen testing company called Radically Open Security. First thing, I am a bit, how do I say this? I'm a bit of an ideological, like, techno-hippie. So, in that sense, I'm very much into open source. I'm very much into nonprofit business models. I don't know if any of you were at my panel discussion from yesterday, but if so, then you got a little bit of information on some tidbits about the governance structure of my company. A tiny bits will come back later in the talk, but for those of you who were not at the panel discussion yesterday, I'll just clue you in real quick, again, just for context. My company is not for profit, which is very unusual for a cybersecurity company. I gave the company away 10 years ago for €1 to a foundation. We also donate 90% of our profits to charity. We've donated over €1 million to the NLNet Foundation, which then funds open source digital rights initiatives and anything for an open internet. Anyhow, but I think that's enough about me and the company. But I think let's continue on with what you really came for, and that was the idea of security Kaizen. So I'm sure that many of you are in the DevOps movement. That would certainly attract you to a conference like this one. And of course, the whole idea of Kaizen is continuous improvement. So with the idea, I think, originally coming from Japan in the 1980s with the Toyota production system. And of course, many of these ideas eventually made their way into DevOps. So, but one thing about Kaizen, though, and that was particularly useful also about the movement back then, was that they were also getting every single employee involved, wherever they happened to be inside the organization. Of course, when we think about security nowadays, oftentimes it tends to be us versus them. Right? We get a little bit of a picture of this in books like The Phoenix Project, right? But it doesn't have to be adversarial. Of course, the security department is frequently known as the Department of No. Doesn't make us very popular, but again, it does not need to be this way. And furthermore, by thinking that you can isolate cybersecurity in the CISO office, in the ivory tower, is really making a huge mistake, because in cybersecurity, context is everything. And the people who are most likely to actually have the context are the developers, and the system administrators, and the DevOps professionals. So security must not live in the CISO office. It must live in the business units, in the dev teams. But of course, the real question then is, how are we able to optimally do this? So sorry, this clicker. Oh, no, wrong way. Oh, this is not helping. Oh, there we go. So one of the things that we do at Radically Open Security is that we have a particularly open and transparent workflow with our penetration testing. Now first, maybe I should just define penetration testing for those of you who are not yet familiar with the concept. Pen testing, for short, is security auditing through ethical hackers. So basically, you don't know how to defend your stuff until you know how to break your stuff. So we basically come in, break your stuff, tell you how we did it, and then in the end, of course, provide a report and some advice on how to fix it. Now, this is the typical workflow you will get from any pen testing company. This is completely non-innovative, and this is an incredibly huge industry. However, at the end of the day, this pen test report should not be all there is. Because, again, coming back to Kaizen, security is a long-term process. Security is a mindset, and it's not just a set of one-time patches that you receive from the pen test report. So what you actually need to do is you need to somehow be able to draw the developers in to the security testing process. Now, the way that we do this at Radically Open Security, first, one thing you need to understand is we are a 100% online company. What you can see right here is a screenshot from Rocket Chat, which is basically an open source, self-hosted Slack clone that we use. It's basically our office. We've got about 50 staff members, and they are geographically distributed across almost every continent. So in that sense, having a physical office doesn't even make much sense. But what this means is with Peek over our shoulder, we invite the customers to join us in our chat room, which is effectively speaking our office, so customers can actually watch us breaking their stuff at any given moment in time. What's even better than that, also, is that we highly encourage developers to think along with us and to even try their hands at breaking their own software themselves. Because it's very easy to come in as a pen testing company and be like, you're doing it wrong, right? And then what do we get in that case? We get defensive people. Because the moment you say you're doing it wrong, what kind of reaction are you going to get? You're going to get like, no, like, no problem here, right? So, and it's not just the developers of the company that we invite in, but even subcontractors who the customer might be hiring in are also welcome. So if you have down chain, suppliers who are helping to also develop your software, even if they're from a different company, they can basically come too. Now, the really nice thing about this is it sort of takes people out of that defensive position. Because when people can be part of the pen testing process and they help with finding the vulnerabilities themselves, not only does it take the defensiveness away, but they actually start to feel ownership over the process. Another thing that we also do are these things that we call red-blue pen tests. And, there's actually two variants. There's red-blue, there's also red-red. Now, how this works is that we frequently take dev teams of roughly, let's say, a dozen people. We divide them into two teams, let's say, in this example, a red team and a red team. And each team of roughly 6 people is then led by one of our senior pen testers. We gamify the whole thing, there's a scoreboard, and then the developers compete against each other to see who can hack their own stuff in a predefined period of time. So this has a lot of value because on the one hand, you now have a dozen pairs of eyes a dozen brains that are basically putting, the effort into these findings, which basically means at the end you're actually getting a quite thorough pen test, because you would actually be surprised at how easily software developers, particularly senior ones, can flip that, that switch to that other mindset, and because they're so familiar with the technical details, and again, the devil is in the details with hacking, that you actually wind up getting quite a thorough pen test that way. But what's even more important is that, again, it takes the developers out of the role for, it could be 3 days to a week. And the number one comment that we get with these kinds of red-blue pen tests is, and I quote, "I will never look at code the same way again." So, I think really, part of the question here is then really asking the question, of any of your pen testing vendors, how is it that we can get them to actually draw our organization inside the process, rather than keeping us outside and operating like opaque black boxes? There we go. So, but there is resistance to openness and transparency. You get this very frequently in corporations. So, there's a couple concepts that I would like to explain. The first is, we think keeping everything secret somehow, brings a layer of security by obscurity that buys us something. But if you think about it, actually, by being as open as possible, it actually reduces your attack surface. And I can explain why. If you take internal things and can, for example, release some of the intellectual property as open source, then what it means is the stuff that's actually closed, there's actually less of it, which means that you're better able to protect it. In security, there's something called the Karakov's principle, which most of the time applies to crypto. And it's part of the reason why, with cryptography, generally the algorithms are open, so they can be studied by the best minds on the planet. But the actual key material, as little as possible, is what you wind up keeping secret. It's the same thing also with your code base. It's the same thing also with internal processes, with, look, obviously there's some things you have to keep secret. Things like personal details, of course, particularly because of GDPR. But ironically enough, by giving things away, it basically means you have less remaining to protect. That's one thing. The second thing also is that by taking a more open stance, you actually find that you and your competitors also can help each other. I don't know about German, but in the Netherlands, in Dutch, we have a really excellent word, and it is called conculega, which is basically a combination of two words in Dutch. The first is concurrent, which basically means competitor, and the second word is collega, which basically means colleague. And then these two things are combined, which really shows that our competitors are both competitors and colleagues at the same time. But how we actually choose to visualize this and consider them is up to us. But in cybersecurity, actually, you have no competitors. Certainly not with other companies in your industry, because the real competitors that you have is the cyber criminals, right? And the other truth is the cybercrime industry is collaborative. They don't silo. When you look at the cybercrime industry, they specialize and they work together. You have different malware groups that, so one group might create the malware, another group creates the droppers, another group, provides like a help desk, which you can call in case the code isn't working. Another, group is, translating phishing mails into multiple languages, and a fifth one launders your cryptocurrency, right? But the point is that oftentimes also in commercial industry, we silo ourselves. We silo ourselves from the other organizations in our industry. We also silo ourselves internally at our companies. And this is not helpful, particularly with things like cybersecurity. I mean, of course, with cybersecurity, the number one thing that you need to do, and this all comes back in almost every pen test report, of course, is software updates, right? But just that, can be difficult in particularly large, siloed organizations, because oftentimes, certain business units, they can't be bothered. They're afraid of breaking things. So something that in theory should be super easy to do winds up turning into a big political mess. And that's, not even considering other factors like coordinated vulnerability disclosure. If there's a hacker who then reports a vulnerability, what's going to happen? If you report this to a particular department, how do you actually ensure that they fix it within a timely fashion? Also in the case of bug bounties, I have seen fights break out between departments about which department is going to pay the bounty, right? So this kind of siloization is not helping, and it also means if the cybercrime ecosystem is collaborative, but the defense side is siloed, we're going to lose, right? So it's the same thing also with, I think, proprietary versus open source. Because I've been a few times to RSA conference in San Francisco. It's an incredibly large corporate trade show. Every year I see these really big booths, many of which are with startups, selling some form of proprietary black box. It could be some scanning box, it could be some monitoring box, there's many different flavors. Of course, usually after about 5 years, many of the startups kind of disappear and then they're sort of replaced with new ones. But think about this, with the budget that we have, if we're building these siloed black boxes, how much less effective this is than if we actually were instead crowdfunding with customer revenue the development on a smaller number of open source solutions, right? Why build multiple proprietary closed wheels when you can instead join forces to collaborate on a smaller number of open source wheels? So another thing also is just understanding how dependent we are on the rest of the ecosystem. And also, supply chains lately have also faced a lot of attacks, and certainly the topic of open source supply chains is an important one. Even if you're working on commercial proprietary products, it is most of the time going to be based, well, pretty much always, it's going to be based on open source. So, however, as anyone who has tried to do dependency tracking in their code has noticed, it's very, very difficult to do. And on top of that, in the United States, also CISA had also put out some regulations, also mandating the usage of these things that are called software bill of materials, SBOMs. And the whole principle really behind SBOMs is that they are trying to do dependency tracking basically in a continuous fashion. And not just that, but there's also an XML markup that they can also use to attempt to track CVEs. And CVEs are basically well-known disclosed vulnerabilities. So we can also be able to fix them in the dependencies when they come up. Sounds like a really great idea, but there's a few problems here. The first is that also with things like SBOM tools, there's a lot of them. They are not standardized, and many of them are also commercial. And of course, with many of them also become de facto standards just by merit of being used. And of course, as they say, the great thing about standards is that there's so many of them. So, the problem here is that because, due to the lack of standardization, it also makes, being able to do this dependency tracking harder than it otherwise should be. But we have no choice, and we have seen the consequences also of failed dependencies, and we've also seen the global scope of what happens when software that everyone is using fails. I mean, this wasn't due to open source, but I was also, CrowdStrike, of course, was a pretty good example of how, I literally was stuck at Edinburgh Airport when that happened. And, well, at least the funny part was I was just at DEF CON this summer, and Black Hat, which is a few days before DEF CON, CrowdStrike was actually one of the main sponsors. So there were quite a few people walking around with T-shirts that were like, CrowdStrike Junior QA. I think well-deserved, but look. But the point is that we've seen the consequences of one piece of software and what that can do to almost every industry. So it also is the same thing with open source. And I'm sure you all also know that extremely famous XKCD comic, the one where you have the Jenga blocks, and you've got this big castle over here, and then you've got this little single Jenga block over here that's holding up the other half of it. And then, with the single Jenga block, it basically says, this is developer in his basement in Kansas, right? And that's really how it is. Because, and we also don't think enough about things like funding. These developers in their basements in Kansas, so maybe at a certain point they can be earning money from it, and maybe they don't need to be in a basement. Maybe they can get something slightly more pleasant and ergonomic. Because these developments are precisely, these bits of open source code are precisely what's going to go wrong. Now, there are some good initiatives also that are popping up to help make sure that these developers get funded. By the way, another interesting example also was there was basically a developer, I think it was of Node.js, of the libraries Faker and Colors, and he literally embedded malware in his own piece of open source software that was basically griping about the fact that he wasn't getting paid for the development hours he was putting in. That also made the point with people that, we need to get these people paid, otherwise weird things can happen. So there are projects in Europe at the moment. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the Next Generation Internet, NGI initiative. Raise your hand if you are. Very small number of hands. So NGI is, I would say, the largest funding program for open source, not just in Europe, but in the world. So you should know about this. It is funded by the European Commission. I believe that over 1,000 projects have actually been funded by the NGI initiative so far. So, and this is quite laudable that the European Commission, for precisely the reason of open source supply chain security, has been putting money into making sure that these tiny developers, actually can earn a decent amount of money. The only problem, though, is, well, first of all, there's a couple open calls, by the way. So if anybody actually is working on open source, critical open source software, and if you need funding, do check out NGI. There are open calls. You can get some money. The only problem, though, was that also the program, at least for this upcoming year, was temporarily put on hold, because the European Commission had decided that they wanted to prioritize AI and Web 4.0. I have no idea what Web 4.0 is. Look, but this is also, I think, another reason why we need to lobby, just for open source funding. This is not just about techno-hippies like me, but this is also about every proprietary piece of software, that is also, and critical infrastructure that's also depending upon the health of these libraries. So this topic of open source funding is extremely important. Also, if you work for a company that's using this stuff, please also upstream the improvements and the changes. That also makes a really big difference. So, this clicker doesn't like me. What? Oh, okay. So, we can't have a talk on Kaizen without also at least giving a nod to the concept of DevSecOps. So with DevSecOps, it also is addressing the question of how do we integrate security also into our DevOps process. And also how do we integrate security into things like our CI/CD, tool chains, and also the tooling, well, frequently also open source tooling that we also use to support our DevOps processes. So one thing, of course, is understanding how you can integrate certain things into the process in a continuous fashion. It can start with things like low-hanging fruit, like scanning tools. Do bear in mind, though, with automated scanners, that most of them are complete and utter crap. And I'm not just saying this because I have a pen testing company, but a lot of people actually don't know the difference between a Nessa scan with a header and a footer versus an actual pen test. And the thing is also with security auditing, it's like an artisan craft. Now, the thing, though, with scanners is they have not just false negatives, but they also produce a shockingly huge number of false positives. And just be aware that sifting through all of these false positives might be even more work than doing it by hand, assuming that you know how. So other kinds of testing that you can basically integrate, also with these scanning tools, there's a static, so there's SAST and DAST, so static and dynamic analysis tools. You can run it on your code, it can give you some pointers, but just understand that it's not the last authority on these things, and you will have to sort through a bunch of junk before you find some stuff which is valuable. Another thing, DevSecOps-wise, which is kind of nice, is if you do a pen test and then you do get the pen test report, what you can also do is later on regression testing. So you can basically create unit tests that are testing for the presence of this particular vulnerability that was found, so that later on, once you've continued development, these unit tests basically can check to make sure that at a later point in time that these vulnerabilities haven't accidentally been reintroduced. So this kind of stuff also is, can be quite useful. So, another thing also that I think if you really want to get security into the organization is just considering ways that you can really educate yourself and make it fun. And of course, most of the time with security trainings, we think about these like really awful compliance trainings. Like you watch a video, you click on something, you get some like certificate or something. I mean, honestly, that stuff, in my opinion, I mean, I'm not going to say it's crap, but it's kind of crap. But I mean, it's better than nothing, I guess. But the problem, though, is that people just like do the bare minimum. They forget about it. I mean, that's really not the way to create lasting change. You have to make it fun, and you also have to do it in a way where people take it personally, right? And when I say that people take it personally, things like red-blue pen testing is one way of getting developers to take it personally. Also other things, even with awareness trainings, things like phishing tests, are also very good to do. Be careful, though. Do not name and shame people. With security, you want to use carrots, not sticks. Sticks, will basically force people to find all kinds of ways to go around whatever it is that you're trying to put out there. Carrots, on the other hand, work much better. And really, the more you can gamify things, make it engaging and making it fun, the better you can do. So another thing that you also can consider doing is things like capture the flag exercises. Sometimes, corporations do hire in consultancy companies to run these kinds of things, but to be quite frank, you don't need to hire in an expensive company like mine to be able to do this. You can get all of the war games, capture the flag exercises that you could possibly want for free online, okay? So, for people who completely know nothing about IT or tech, I mean, there's really basic, simple, easy platforms that are super cheap, things like Try Hack Me. You also have Hack the Box. We also have platforms in Dutch. I wouldn't be surprised if there's also platforms in German that do kind of entry-level CTF. If you're a little more advanced than that, there's also capture the flag competitions that are organized for free pretty much every single weekend. And most of them are hosted by universities. Some of them are hosted by hacking teams. And you can fill up, just get a bunch of your friends, get some like pizza and club mate, and just take a day or two just to try and see how you can do in these kinds of hacking competitions. You'll find that it's actually really fun to do, and it's actually one of the best ways to learn about security, because book learning is one thing. I mean, compliance trainings is something else entirely, but actually breaking stuff, like there is no substitute for that. And these kinds of trainings, I think, are really the best way. It gives you something really concrete to work on, something to get your hands dirty with. And again, go to ctftime.org. You can find tons, like hundreds, of these CTF competitions, and you don't have to pay a cent. Another thing also is hacker spaces. I know that there's a lot of great German hacker spaces also in the Netherlands. I also, for quite a while, was going to Tech Inc. in Amsterdam. Take advantage of the fact that you guys have the CCC here. There are so many awesome get-togethers, places to hang, people to meet, clubs that are doing all kinds of wonderful things. Take advantage of that. Adding a social life to this is going to get you so much further. I mean, it's kind of like in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, right? Part of what he talks about with Atomic Habits is, first of all, just making it small, and second of all, like making it part of your identity. And when you actually hang out with people that are doing this, this is also part of how you're going to internalize it. It's part of how also you're going to take it personally. And once you start doing this integration and it starts becoming part of who you are, then shocker, suddenly your code is going to get a lot better, right? And because in the beginning, I mean, developers just don't know what they don't know, right? There's too many unknown unknowns. And running a pen test company, the absolute worst situation almost always is when I go in and then the company basically says, we're fine. You're not going to find anything. I mean, those are the times when there's like blood on the carpets. Always. Even worse is when they get defensive and try to not get us in there in the first place. But honestly, the best performing companies in pen tests, where we basically go in and we do quite a thorough pen test, but we sometimes don't find very much. Those are the customers that basically say, we know we have a problem, right? And we know that there's vulnerabilities here, and we knew we had something here, and we tested it, and we fixed it, and we're looking at this, and we're refactoring it, but there's probably still issues. Those are usually the customers that perform the best, in the pen tests. So, and all of this really comes with knowledge, and even with identity. But the thing is, no matter how much of a hacker you are, again, Kaizen, it's a process. You're never done. You're still going to make mistakes. And that's okay. It has to be okay, because it can't be any other way. Even at Radically Open Security, we develop our own software. You know, we create a pen test reporting suite that we also open sourced and made an OWASP project. It's called OWASP Pentext. And the software developers are pen testers, you know? Not surprising, because a lot of pen testers pivot into pen testing after working, you know, for a decade as a software developer. So, but even then, even when people have been working a considerable amount of time as a pen tester, they still get things wrong. They still make mistakes too. And that has to be okay. And also, hacking your own stuff has to be encouraged, you know? Even with our own infrastructure at Radically Open Security, you know, we use Rocket Chat, we also use GitLab, we use a few other open source tools. One of my pen testers one time, he was playing around, and he basically managed to find a bug. It was a cross-site scripting bug that managed to change the cascading style sheet, and he restyled our Rocket Chat and GitLab with a Barbie theme. So he basically turned everything pink. He swapped all the female names with Barbie. He swapped all of the male names with Ken, and he basically swapped my name with Mattel. And on top of that, he was also playing I'm Just Ken in 8-bit, so. But look, I mean, but the point is, you know, I mean, this is fun, right? And probably at some places, you know, if somebody tried something like this, they would be chastised. But, you know, when people like that, you know, when my hackers do that at my company, what happens? Well, first of all, I paid him. And then I thanked him profusely, and then we fixed the bug. You know? So that's also kind of the other thing, you know, not taking a defensive stance. Same thing also with coordinated vulnerability disclosure. I can't understand companies who get, you know, pen testers, or I should say people doing CVD or bug bounty hunters who basically send in reports that there's something wrong, and then they send their lawyers. Like, I can't imagine that, because do you know how much it costs to hire in pen testers to find those same kinds of problems for you? You know, if somebody is going to report a vulnerability for free, you should say thank you, right? And on top of that, it's also a good practice to make sure that your company internally has a CVD policy and that it is stated clearly on the website, because that too will encourage basically members of the ethical hacking community to report things to you. Now, mind you, they should be reporting things nicely and following CVD guidelines. They shouldn't be trying to extort you. You know, that's something different. But you can also consider implementing a bug bounty program. I'm, by the way, going to put an asterisk on this one. About bug bounty programs. The first thing is, be aware bug bounties are not the same thing as pen tests. Another thing also is make sure that you have the capacity to be able to manage and handle the reports when they first come in. I can remember the first week when I was working at ING Bank and the cybercrime team, when we put a bug bounty program online. I think we had like 200 reports, I think, in the first week. And there's nothing that pisses off hackers more than not having the capacity to be able to respond to that. Because if a hacker reports something and they don't hear anything back, what do you think they're going to do next? They're going to get on Twitter, you know, or they're going to write a blog post, and they're probably going to do something that's really annoying for you. So, yeah, so understand that you need some, if you're running the program yourself, you need some staff to be able to handle that. Some people hire in certain commercial companies to help them with that. I don't have a huge opinion. But also do understand, though, that the quality of the reports that you get in, sometimes, you know, it's a lot of junior people, script kiddies, people in poorer countries that are basically just looking to make money. So you do get a lot of low-level vulnerability reports, oftentimes duplicates. And of course, you know, you're only going to pay one of them also, and then dealing, like, you pay the first one, but then you have to tell the rest of them, sorry, you're not getting paid. So this is a fair amount of work. And the other thing also is, remember, they're usually juniors. Senior pen testers, if you can work for 100 euros an hour at a company like mine, then you're probably not going to be hacking for a t-shirt. So just do be aware that, just because you have a bug bounty program, it's not the same thing as a commercial pen test. All right. I think the final thing is just understanding that, in general, making things commercial does not buy you anything security-wise. One example that I have is with antivirus. Antivirus kind of annoys me because antivirus engines by themselves have no value. They're signature matching engines, but you need a constant stream of signatures to match against, and of course those are usually sold. It's kind of like saying that you're sick, I have the medicine that can heal you, and I will only give you that medicine if you pay me. It's not optimally helping. There are other business models which are not necessarily better, like with companies like Avast. I mean, sure, they'll give you now the signatures for free, but their business model is selling your data. That's not necessarily any better. So in either case, but I think these are the kinds of things where there's also room for a lot of innovation, also with things like open source business models, where you can do things like give away the product and sell the services. And this also requires developers to take the initiative to do things that are crazy, like create more open source startups. Because I think that the commercialization of our security startups has led to us being completely distracted from really trying to make the world more cyber secure. Almost every cybersecurity startup that is successful hires people and grows for 3 to 5 years and then becomes an acqui-hire. In other words, it's hard to hire qualified security staff, so you just buy the company, so that way suddenly, look, you've got all kinds of security team members. But it causes, oftentimes, the product or service that startup was working on to get discarded, because after all, it was an acqui-hire, they just wanted the people. And this is value destruction. So this is also why I highly recommend also looking into things like not-for-profit business models and steward ownership. This is not the emphasis of my talk right now, but if you want some more information about this, go to the video, which will be released of the panel discussion that I did yesterday. Anyhow, I am going to leave this here, but I hope that you all found this interesting. I hope that you all learned something. I hope my clicker will start working. And yeah, and for the rest, I think it is time to have some questions. So thank you so much.